The notification chimed softly on Sarah Chen's phone as she sat in her cramped studio apartment, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face in the dim evening light. Another Tinder match. She almost swiped past it. She'd grown tired of the endless parade of gym selfies and pickup lines that seemed to populate her dating app, but something about this profile made her pause. Marcus Rivera, 29, software engineer, looking for something real in a world full of facades. His photos weren't the typical shirtless mirror shots she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, they showed a man with kind eyes and a genuine smile, hiking through mountain trails, reading in a coffee shop, volunteering at what appeared to be an animal shelter. His bio was simple, honest, refreshing. Sarah, 26, had moved to Denver 6 months earlier for her job as a marketing coordinator at a startup. The transition had been harder than she'd anticipated. Work consumed most of her days, and her evenings were spent in solitude, scrolling through social media and watching Netflix. Her college friends were scattered across the country, busy with their own lives, their own relationships. The loneliness had crept in slowly, like a fog rolling over the mountains that surrounded her new city. She joined Tinder reluctantly, after her sister Emma's persistent encouragement during their weekly video calls. "You're never going to meet anyone if you don't put yourself out there," Emma had said, her voice crackling through the phone from their hometown of Seattle. "Just try it for a month. What's the worst that could happen?" Thank you to all our loyal viewers and subscribers. Your support means everything. We're here every day with gripping true crime stories, deep dives, and the chilling details you won't hear anywhere else. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss an update. Because here at True Crime Vault, we don't just tell stories. We uncover the truth. Now, staring at Marcus's profile, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: genuine interest. She swiped right. The match was instant. Within minutes, a message appeared. "I have a confession. I've been to that coffee shop in your third photo at least a dozen times, and I can't believe we've never crossed paths. Either we have terrible timing, or the universe was saving this moment." Sarah smiled despite herself. She looked at her third photo, a candid shot her friend had taken of her at Roasters and Company, her favorite spot near her apartment. She was mid-laugh, coffee cup in hand, looking relaxed and genuinely happy. It was one of the few photos where she felt like herself. "Maybe it's fate," she typed back, then immediately cringed at how cliché it sounded. But before she could delete it, she hit send. "I'd like to think so," came his quick reply. "I'm Marcus, by the way. And you're Sarah, according to your profile, but I have a feeling there's a lot more to your story." What followed was the kind of conversation Sarah had almost given up hope of finding on a dating app. Marcus asked thoughtful questions not just about her job or her hobbies, but about her dreams, her fears, and what had brought her to Denver. He shared stories about his work developing software for nonprofits, his passion for hiking the Colorado trails, and his close relationship with his mother, who lived in nearby Boulder. The conversation flowed with an ease that felt rare and precious. Hours passed without Sarah realizing it. By the time she glanced at the clock, it was past midnight, and they'd been talking for 4 hours straight. "I hate to say this, but I should probably get some sleep," she typed reluctantly. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Of course. But Sarah, I'd really like to continue this conversation over coffee. Would you be interested in meeting at Roasters and Company tomorrow evening? Around 7. Sarah stared at the message, her heart racing. She'd been burned before by guys who seemed perfect online but turned out to be completely different in person. But something about Marcus felt different, authentic in a way that made her want to take the risk. "I'd love that," she replied. "Perfect. I'll be the guy trying not to look too nervous while pretending to read a book. See you tomorrow, Sarah." As she finally put her phone down and got ready for bed, Sarah felt a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced in months. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe all she needed was to put herself out there. She had no way of knowing that across town, the man who called himself Marcus Rivera was sitting in a different apartment entirely, one filled with fake IDs, multiple phones, and a wall covered with printed photos of women he'd met through various dating apps. Sarah's picture was already pinned to the center, a red string connecting it to a detailed plan he'd been perfecting for months. His real name wasn't Marcus Rivera. It was David Kellerman, and Sarah Chen was about to become his next victim. The next evening, Sarah arrived at Roasters and Company 5 minutes early, a habit she developed to calm her predate nerves. She'd changed her outfit 3 times, finally settling on dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that Emma had insisted brought out her eyes. Her long black hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she'd applied just enough makeup to feel confident but not overdone. She ordered her usual lavender latte and found a table near the window, where she could watch for Marcus while trying to look casual. The coffee shop was busy with the after-work crowd, filled with the familiar sounds of steaming milk, quiet conversations, and the gentle clacking of laptop keyboards. At exactly 7 p.m., the door chimed, and Sarah's breath caught. The man walking toward her was even more attractive than his photos had suggested. Marcus was tall, probably around 6 feet, with dark hair and the kind of warm brown eyes that seemed to light up when he smiled. He wore a simple, gray button-down shirt and dark jeans, and he carried a worn paperback book, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which surprised and delighted her. "Sarah?" he asked, approaching her table with what appeared to be genuine nervousness. "That's me," she said, standing to greet him. "And you must be Marcus. Guilty as charged." He held up the book with a sheepish grin. "I figured if I was going to pretend to read while waiting, I might as well choose something good. My sister recommended this one." They settled into conversation as easily as they had online. Marcus was charming without being aggressive, funny without trying too hard. He asked about her work, listened intently to her answers, and shared stories about his own projects that made him seem passionate and driven. "So what brought you to Denver?" he asked, leaning forward slightly, his attention focused entirely on her. "Adventure, I guess," Sarah said, stirring her latte. "I'd been in the same job, same routine, same group of friends since college. When this opportunity came up, it felt like a sign to try something new. Though I'll admit, it's been lonelier than I expected." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I moved here about 3 years ago from Phoenix. Best decision I ever made. But yeah, starting over in a new city is tough. It takes time to build real connections." "Exactly," Sarah said, feeling understood in a way she hadn't in months. "Everyone back home thinks I'm living this exciting new life, but most nights I'm just watching Netflix and ordering takeout." "Well," Marcus said, his eyes twinkling, "maybe we can change that." The conversation flowed seamlessly from topic to topic. They discovered they both loved hiking, though Sarah admitted she was still learning the Colorado trails. Marcus offered to show her some of his favorites, describing hidden waterfalls and scenic overlooks with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved the outdoors. They talked about books, movies, travel dreams. Marcus had spent a summer backpacking through Europe after college, and his stories were vivid and engaging. Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, feeling lighter with each passing minute. "I have to ask," Sarah said as they ordered a second round of drinks. "What made you choose Tinder? You seem too normal for dating apps." Marcus laughed, a rich sound that made Sarah's stomach flutter. "Honestly, work keeps me pretty busy, and most of my friends are coupled up now. It's hard to meet people organically when your social circle is shrinking." "What about you?" "My sister's relentless campaigning," Sarah admitted. "She insisted I'd never meet anyone if I didn't put myself out there. I was ready to delete the app when your message came through." "I'm glad you didn't," Marcus said, his voice soft and sincere. As the evening progressed, Sarah felt herself relaxing completely. Marcus seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her, not just impressing her. He remembered details from their online conversation, asked thoughtful follow-up questions, and shared enough about himself to seem open and honest. When the coffee shop began to empty and the baristas started cleaning up around them, Sarah realized they'd been talking for over 2 hours. "I should probably head home," she said reluctantly. "Early morning tomorrow." "Of course," Marcus said, standing as she gathered her purse. "But I'd love to see you again. Maybe I could show you one of those hiking trails this weekend? There's a beautiful spot about 30 minutes outside the city, Emerald Lake. It's an easy hike, perfect for beginners." Sarah hesitated for just a moment. Meeting someone from a dating app for coffee in a public place was one thing, but going hiking together felt like a bigger step. Yet everything about Marcus seemed genuine, safe, trustworthy. "That sounds amazing," she said finally. "I'd love that." They exchanged phone numbers, and Marcus walked her to her car, a gentlemanly gesture that didn't feel forced or performative. As she drove home, Sarah found herself smiling, already looking forward to their weekend adventure. She texted Emma as soon as she got home. "The date went amazing. Going hiking with him this weekend." I think you might have been right about putting myself out there. Emma's response came quickly. I knew it. Details tomorrow. Be safe and have fun. What Sarah didn't know was that across town, David Kellerman was updating a detailed file on his laptop. He'd memorized every detail she'd shared. Her work schedule, her apartment location, gleaned from casual conversation about her commute, her lack of close friends in Denver, her family back in Seattle. The hiking trail he'd suggested wasn't chosen randomly. Emerald Lake was remote, rarely visited on weekdays, with cell service that cut out about halfway up the trail. It was the perfect place for what he had planned. David opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a small plastic bag containing white powder enough Rohypnol to incapacitate someone Sarah's size for hours. He'd used it twice before, on women he'd met through carefully crafted dating profiles in other cities. Both times, it worked perfectly, but as he sat there planning Sarah's assault, something unexpected happened. For just a moment, he remembered her laugh, the genuine warmth in her eyes, the way she'd talked about her dreams and fears with such honest vulnerability. He shook off the feeling quickly. Empathy was a weakness he couldn't afford. Sarah Chen was just another target, another challenge to overcome. The fact that she seemed genuinely kind and trusting would only make it easier. As he prepared for their weekend hike, David felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. He'd been perfecting his technique for over a year now, and Sarah would be his masterpiece. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect Colorado day that made the mountains look close enough to touch. Sarah woke early, excitement fluttering in her stomach as she prepared for her hiking date with Marcus. She'd gone shopping the night before, buying proper hiking boots and a small backpack, determined to make a good impression. She packed water, energy bars, and a first aid kit her mother had always insisted on being prepared for outdoor activities. As she laced up her new boots, Sarah felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. It had been months since she'd felt this excited about anything, let alone a second date. Marcus had texted the night before with detailed directions to the trailhead, along with a sweet message. Can't wait to show you one of my favorite spots. The view at the top is worth every step. Sleep well, Sarah. The drive to Emerald Lake took her through winding mountain roads lined with aspens just beginning to turn golden. It was beautiful, peaceful, exactly the kind of adventure she'd hoped to find in Colorado. She found the small gravel parking area easily enough, and Marcus was already there, leaning against a silver SUV that looked expensive and well-maintained. You made it, he said, greeting her with a warm smile and what seemed like genuine pleasure at seeing her. Ready for an adventure? Absolutely, Sarah replied, shouldering her new backpack. Though I should warn you, I'm still pretty new to this whole hiking thing. Don't worry, it's an easy trail, mostly gradual inclines, and the payoff is incredible. Plus, he added with a grin, I brought enough water and snacks for both of us, just in case. They set off together, following a well-marked trail that wound through dense pine forest. Marcus was an attentive guide, pointing out different types of trees and wildlife, sharing stories about his previous hikes in the area. He seemed to know the trail well, confidently leading them along less obvious paths that he claimed offered better views. This is amazing, Sarah said about an hour in, pausing to catch her breath and take in the scenery. The trail had led them to a small clearing with a stunning view of the valley below. I can't believe I've been in Colorado for 6 months and never done anything like this. It's easy to get caught up in city life, Marcus agreed, handing her a water bottle from his pack. But this is why I moved here. There's something about being in nature that puts everything in perspective. As they continued hiking, Sarah noticed they seemed to be the only people on the trail. She mentioned this to Marcus, who nodded thoughtfully. Weekdays are always quieter, but yeah, this trail isn't as popular as some of the others. That's what I love about it. It feels like having the whole mountain to yourself. The trail began to climb more steeply, and Sarah found herself breathing harder. Marcus was patient, stopping frequently to let her rest, making sure she was drinking enough water. His attentiveness felt caring rather than condescending, and Sarah found herself growing more attracted to him with each passing hour. How much farther? She asked as they paused at another scenic overlook. Not much, Marcus replied. Maybe another 20 minutes to the lake. But there's something I want to show you first, a hidden viewpoint that most people miss. It's just a short detour. He led her off the main trail onto what looked like a barely visible deer path winding through thick forest. Sarah hesitated for a moment, looking back at the clear, well-marked trail they were leaving behind. "Are you sure this is safe?" she asked. "I don't want to get lost." "Trust me," Marcus said, his voice warm and reassuring. "I've done this hike dozens of times. The view is incredible, and we'll be back on the main trail in no time." Sarah nodded, pushing aside her instinctive caution. Marcus had been nothing but trustworthy so far, and she didn't want to seem paranoid or overly cautious on their second date. The narrow path led them deeper into the forest, where the canopy blocked out most of the sunlight, creating an almost twilight atmosphere even though it was still mid-afternoon. Sarah noticed her phone had lost signal entirely, but she wasn't too concerned. Marcus obviously knew where they were going. "Just through here," Marcus said, pushing aside some low-hanging branches. "There's a small clearing with an incredible view of the whole valley." Sarah followed him through the dense vegetation, emerging into a small, isolated clearing surrounded by thick forest. There was indeed a beautiful view, but something felt off. The clearing was tiny, almost claustrophobic, and they seemed very far from the main trail. "It's beautiful," she said politely, though she was beginning to feel uneasy. "Maybe we should head back soon? I don't want to lose too much daylight." "Of course," Marcus agreed. "But first, let me get you something to drink. You look a little overheated." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a sports drink bottle, the seal already broken. "It's electrolyte replacement. You'll feel better after you hydrate." Sarah accepted the bottle gratefully. The hike had been more challenging than she'd expected, and she was indeed feeling overheated and slightly dizzy. She took a long drink, then another, not noticing the slightly bitter aftertaste beneath the fruit flavor. "Better?" Marcus asked, watching her intently. "Much, thank you," Sarah replied, though she was beginning to feel strange lightheaded in a way that seemed disproportionate to the physical exertion of the hike. Within minutes, the world began to tilt. Sarah tried to take a step and nearly fell, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. Panic flashed through her mind as she realized something was very wrong. "Marcus," she said, her voice slurred and distant sounding even to her own ears. "I don't feel well. Something's wrong." But when she looked up at him, the warm, caring expression she'd grown accustomed to was gone. In its place was something cold, calculating, predatory. "I know," he said simply. "It'll be over soon." Sarah tried to run, tried to scream, but her body no longer obeyed her commands. The world spun around her as she collapsed to the forest floor, the last thing she saw being Marcus or whoever he really was standing over her with an expression of cold satisfaction. As consciousness faded, Sarah's final coherent thought was of her sister Emma, and how she'd never get the chance to tell her that maybe, sometimes, the worst that could happen was worse than either of them had ever imagined. Emma Chen had always been the type of person who worried, but she tried not to be overbearing about it. When Sarah had moved to Denver, Emma had made a conscious effort to give her sister space to build her new life, limiting their check-ins to weekly video calls and the occasional text. But when Saturday night came and went without the promised update about Sarah's hiking date, Emma felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Sarah always followed through on her promises to call, especially when it came to dating updates. It was their thing, dissecting every detail of Sarah's romantic adventures over wine and video chat. By Sunday afternoon, Emma's casual concern had transformed into genuine worry. Her calls went straight to voicemail. Her texts remained unread and unanswered. This wasn't like Sarah at all. Maybe her phone died, Emma's husband Jason suggested when she expressed her concerns over dinner. "You know how bad she is about charging it." "For an entire day?" Emma shook her head. "And she would have found a way to contact me by now. She knows I worry." By Monday morning, Emma's anxiety had reached a fever pitch. She called Sarah's work, pretending to be checking on a family emergency, only to learn that Sarah hadn't shown up for her meetings and hadn't called in sick. That's when Emma knew something was seriously wrong. She immediately called the Denver Police Department, only to be told that Sarah hadn't been missing long enough to file a report. Adults had the right to disappear, the desk sergeant explained patiently. She'd have to wait 48 hours. "But this isn't like her," Emma insisted, gripping her phone tightly. "She's responsible, reliable. She wouldn't just vanish without telling anyone." "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but we need to follow protocol. Most missing person cases resolve themselves within the first day or two. If you still haven't heard from her by Wednesday, call us back." Emma hung up, frustrated and frightened. She couldn't just sit in Seattle and wait for bureaucratic timelines while her sister might be in danger. She booked the next flight to Denver. Meanwhile, at Sarah's apartment complex, her neighbor Mrs. Patterson was becoming increasingly concerned about the smell coming from the unit next door. At first, she'd assumed it was just garbage that needed to be taken out, but as the days passed, the odor had grown stronger and more unpleasant. When Emma arrived at Sarah's apartment Tuesday evening, armed with the spare key Sarah had given her during the move, Mrs. Patterson was waiting in the hallway. "Are you Sarah's sister?" the elderly woman asked. "I was hoping someone would come. There's been a terrible smell, and I haven't seen her since Saturday morning." Emma's blood ran cold. She'd been hoping against hope that she'd find Sarah safe at home, maybe nursing a hangover or dealing with a mild injury from her hiking adventure. The spare key trembled in her hand as she approached Sarah's door. The smell hit her as soon as she opened the apartment. It wasn't Sarah, thank God, but something organic and wrong that made Emma's stomach lurch. She followed the scent to the kitchen, where she found Sarah's hiking pack sitting on the counter, still packed with water bottles, energy bars, and a first aid kit. But Sarah was nowhere to be found. Emma immediately called 911, and within an hour, Sarah's apartment was swarming with police officers and crime scene technicians. Detective Maria Santos, a 20-year veteran of the Denver PD, took charge of the investigation. "Tell me about your sister's plans for the weekend," Detective Santos said, settling across from Emma at Sarah's small dining table while Tex processed the scene around them. Emma explained about the dating app, the coffee date, the planned hiking trip. She showed the detective their text conversation, including Sarah's excitement about meeting Marcus. "Do we know Marcus's last name?" Santos asked. "Rivera, I think," Emma said, scrolling through the messages. "Sarah mentioned it during our last call." Detective Santos made notes, but her expression was troubled. "We'll need to get into your sister's phone and dating app accounts. Do you know her passwords?" Emma shook her head. "She was pretty private about that stuff. But I know she used Tinder. She showed me his profile during our video call Friday night." What they discovered when they finally gained access to Sarah's accounts sent chills through the investigation team. The Marcus Rivera profile had vanished completely from Tinder, as if it had never existed. The phone number Sarah had been texting with was traced to a burner phone purchased with cash in a different state. "This is looking like a predator situation," Detective Santos explained to Emma. "Someone who creates fake profiles specifically to target victims. The question is whether this was opportunistic or if your sister was specifically chosen." The investigation expanded rapidly. Sarah's credit cards hadn't been used since Friday. Her car was still in the apartment complex parking garage. There was no activity on her social media accounts, no sign that she'd left town voluntarily. But the most disturbing discovery came when crime scene techs processed the hiking pack Sarah had left behind. Mixed in with her legitimate hiking supplies, they found a small tracking device, the kind used to monitor vehicles or personal belongings. Someone was planning to follow her. Detective Santos told Emma grimly. "This wasn't a random encounter. Your sister was being stalked." As the investigation entered its second week, the Denver Police Department released Sarah's photo to local media, hoping someone had seen her on the day she disappeared. The story was picked up by regional news outlets, then national true crime podcasts, then social media. #FindSarahChen began trending on Twitter, accompanied by warnings about dating app safety and the dangers of meeting strangers online. But despite the public attention, despite the professional investigation, despite Emma's desperate searching and posting on every missing person forum she could find, Sarah Chen seemed to have vanished without a trace. What none of them knew was that Sarah wasn't missing at all. She was being held captive less than 50 miles away, in a soundproofed basement room that David Kellerman had spent months preparing for exactly this purpose. And she wasn't his first victim. Sarah regained consciousness slowly, fighting through layers of chemical fog that made her thoughts sluggish and her limbs heavy. The first thing she noticed was the cold, a bone-deep chill that seemed to seep up from whatever surface she was lying on. The second was the darkness, so complete that she couldn't tell if her eyes were open or closed. She tried to sit up and immediately felt the restraints around her wrists and ankles. Panic shot through her like electricity, burning away the last of the drug-induced haze. She was chained to what felt like a concrete floor in a room that smelled of dampness and something else, something organic and terrifying that she didn't want to identify. "Help!" she screamed, her voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. "Help me! Someone help me!" But even as she shouted, some part of her knew it was useless. The sound didn't carry the way it would in a normal room. Wherever she was, it was designed to contain sound as effectively as it contained her. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, Sarah began to make out shapes in the gloom. She was in what appeared to be a basement room with concrete walls and a single small window set high up near the ceiling. The window was boarded over, allowing only thin slivers of light to filter through. In one corner of the room sat a chemical toilet and a sink with a single faucet. In another corner was a mattress stained and old, but with clean sheets and a pillow. Someone had prepared this space, planned for a long-term captivity. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a random crime. She hadn't been grabbed by some opportunistic predator. Someone had specifically targeted her, studied her, planned this entire scenario from the moment she swiped right on Marcus Rivera's profile. "Oh God," she whispered, remembering the tracking device the police would eventually find in her hiking pack. He'd been watching her, following her, learning her routines and habits. The coffee date, the hiking trip, it had all been an elaborate setup. She tested the restraints around her wrists. They were professional-grade shackles, not rope or zip ties that she might have a chance of breaking. The chain was long enough to allow her to reach the toilet and sink, to lie down on the mattress, but not long enough to reach the door or the boarded window. Footsteps sounded on stairs she couldn't see, growing closer. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as a door opened somewhere behind her, letting in a shaft of light that seemed blindingly bright after the darkness. "You're awake," said a familiar voice. Marcus, or whoever he really was, stepped into her field of vision, no longer bothering to maintain the warm, caring persona he'd shown her during their dates. "Let me go," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. "My sister will be looking for me. People know I was with you." He laughed, a sound completely different from the warm laughter she remembered from their coffee date. "People know you were with Marcus Rivera, who doesn't exist. And your sister is in Denver right now, talking to police who have no idea where to look for you." The casual cruelty in his voice, the clear indication that he'd been monitoring the search for her, made Sarah's stomach lurch with despair. This wasn't some impulsive crime. This was the work of someone who had done this before, someone who had perfected the art of making people disappear. "What do you want?" she asked, though she was afraid of the answer. "Nothing you can give willingly," he replied matter-of-factly. "But don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you if you don't cooperate. Think of this as an extended stay. You'll have food, water, and basic necessities. All you have to do is be patient." "Patient for what?" He smiled, and the expression was so cold that Sarah felt her blood freeze. "For me to decide what to do with you." He left then, climbing back up the stairs and locking the door behind him, plunging Sarah back into near-total darkness. She sat in stunned silence, trying to process the nightmare her life had become. But as the hours passed, Sarah's initial shock began to transform into something else: determination. She wasn't going to just sit here and wait for whatever this monster had planned. She was going to find a way out. She began to systematically explore every inch of her prison, feeling along the walls for weaknesses, testing the strength of her restraints, examining the sink and toilet for anything that might be useful. The chain attached to her ankle was bolted into the concrete floor with what felt like heavy-duty hardware, but the chain itself was made of individual links. Maybe, with enough time and patience, she could find a way to weaken one of those links. She thought about Emma, probably frantic with worry by now. She thought about her parents, who still called every Sunday and would be devastated when they learned what had happened. She thought about all the things she'd never gotten to do, all the dreams she'd never pursued because she'd been waiting for the right time. But more than anything, she thought about survival. Whatever this man had planned for her, she wasn't going to make it easy for him. She was going to fight for every day, every hour, every minute of life she had left. Because somewhere above her, she could hear him moving around, and she had the sinking feeling that she wasn't the first woman he'd brought to this basement. And if she didn't find a way out soon, she probably wouldn't be the last. 3 weeks after Sarah's disappearance, Detective Maria Santos sat in her cluttered office staring at a wall covered with photos, maps, and timeline charts that told the story of a predator who seemed to exist only in shadows. The Marcus Rivera case, as it had come to be known within the department, was unlike anything she'd encountered in her 20 years of police work. "He's a ghost," said Detective Jim Crawford, Santos's partner, as he entered with 2 cups of coffee and a stack of new case files. "No Marcus Rivera matching our suspect's description has ever existed in any database we can access. No driver's license, no social security number, no credit history. It's like he materialized out of thin air just to target Sarah Chen." Santos accepted the coffee gratefully. She'd been working 18-hour days since Sarah's disappearance, driven by a combination of professional duty and personal rage at the calculated cruelty of the crime. What about the phone records? Dead end. The number Sarah was texting with belonged to a burner phone purchased with cash in Albuquerque 6 months ago. No surveillance footage from the store, no way to trace the buyer. Whoever this guy is, he's been planning this for a long time. The investigation had expanded far beyond Denver's city limits. Santos had reached out to law enforcement agencies across the Southwest, looking for similar cases, women who had disappeared after meeting men through dating apps, men who turned out not to exist. What she found was terrifying. "Look at this," Santos said, pulling up a file on her computer. Phoenix PD, 8 months ago. Jennifer Martinez, 24, met a guy named Michael Thompson on Bumble. They went on 2 dates, then she disappeared during what was supposed to be a weekend camping trip. Michael Thompson's profile vanished. The phone number was a burner, no trace of the guy anywhere. Crawford leaned over her shoulder to read the report. "Anybody? Never found. But look at the pattern. A young woman, new to the city, with limited social connections, met the guy on a dating app. And here's another one." She pulled up a second file. "Albuquerque, 5 months ago. Rebecca Winters, 27, software developer who'd just moved there for work. Met David Martinez on Tinder, went hiking with him, never came home." "Jesus," Crawford muttered. "Same MO? Identical. Fake profile, burner phone, remote hiking location. Rebecca's car was found at a trailhead, but there was no sign of her or this David Martinez character." Santos had spent the morning on conference calls with detectives in Phoenix and Albuquerque, comparing notes and sharing evidence. What emerged was the profile of a serial predator who targeted isolated women through dating apps, using fake identities and carefully planned scenarios to abduct them. "The really disturbing part," Santos continued, "is how sophisticated this operation is. We're not dealing with some opportunistic creep. This guy has multiple fake identities, multiple phones, access to resources that allow him to maintain false personas for months at a time. He's either independently wealthy or he has help." The task force Santos had assembled included FBI behavioral analysts, cybercrime specialists, and detectives from 3 states. They'd created a profile of their suspect: organized, patient, intelligent, with extensive knowledge of law enforcement procedures and digital security. "He's definitely done this before," said Dr. Patricia Reeves, the FBI's behavioral analyst, during their morning briefing. "The level of planning, the attention to detail, the way he's been able to stay ahead of our investigation suggests years of experience. Sarah Chen, Jennifer Martinez, and Rebecca Winters are probably just the ones we know about." The thought that there might be other victims, other women who had simply vanished without a trace, haunted Santos as she worked. How many missing person cases have been written off as runaways or voluntary disappearances when they were actually the work of this predator? "We need to expand the search," Santos told her team. "Go back 2 years, maybe 3. Look for missing women who fit the profile: young, recently relocated, limited local social connections. And cross-reference with dating app usage if possible." Emma Chen had become an unofficial member of the investigation team, providing insights into Sarah's personality and habits that helped the detectives understand their victim's mindset. She'd extended her stay in Denver indefinitely, moving into Sarah's apartment and coordinating with various missing person organizations and true crime communities online. Sarah wouldn't have gone off trail willingly, Emma insisted during one of their regular briefings. She was cautious about that kind of thing. If this Marcus person convinced her to leave the main hiking path, he must have been very persuasive, very trustworthy. "That fits with our profile," Dr. Reeves agreed. "This individual is likely very charming, skilled at building rapid rapport with potential victims. He probably studies their online profiles extensively before making contact. tailoring his persona to appeal to their specific interests and vulnerabilities. The technology angle of the investigation had proven particularly frustrating. Despite the efforts of FBI cybercrime specialists, they'd been unable to trace the fake dating profiles beyond their creation. The Marcus Rivera profile that had attracted Sarah had been built using stolen photos from a real person, a software engineer from Portland who had no idea his pictures were being used by a predator hundreds of miles away. The photos were digitally altered just enough to avoid reverse image searches, explained Agent Lisa Chen, the FBI's cybercrime specialist. He's tech-savvy, knows how to cover his digital tracks, but everyone makes mistakes eventually. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah's elderly neighbor, had been reviewing her home security footage at Emma's request, looking for any sign of Sarah on the day she disappeared. What she found was something else entirely. "There," she said, pointing to a timestamp from the previous Tuesday, 5 days before Sarah's hiking date. That man was looking at the apartment numbers, like he was trying to figure out which unit was which. The grainy footage showed a figure in a baseball cap and sunglasses studying the building directory. It wasn't much, but it was the first visual evidence they had of their suspect conducting surveillance. He was casing the building, Santos realized, learning Sarah's routines, confirming her address. This wasn't just about the dating app, he was stalking her in real life too. As the investigation entered its 4th week, the media attention intensified. Sarah's case had been featured on several true crime podcasts, and #FindSarahChen has generated thousands of social media posts. The publicity brought tips from across the country, most of them useless, but a few that made Santos's pulse quicken. A woman in Colorado Springs called to report that she'd been contacted by a Marcus Rivera on Tinder 6 months earlier. They'd exchanged messages for several days before she got a bad feeling and blocked him. A server at a restaurant in Boulder reported serving a couple matching Sarah and Marcus's description on what appeared to be a first date, noting that the man had asked very specific questions about the woman's work schedule and living situation. Each tip added another piece to the puzzle, but the big picture remained frustratingly incomplete. Somewhere out there, a predator was holding Sarah Chen captive and possibly other women as well. Every day that passed reduced the chances of finding her alive. But Detective Santos refused to give up hope. In her experience, even the most careful criminals eventually made a mistake. And when this one did, she'd be ready. While the investigation continued above ground, Sarah had been developing her own understanding of her captor's methods through careful observation and grim discovery. During her 3rd week in captivity, while exploring the furthest reaches of what her chains would allow, her fingers had found something that made her blood run cold. Scratched into the concrete wall, barely visible in the dim light, were 2 sets of initials, JM and RW. Jennifer Martinez, Rebecca Winters. Sarah stared at the crude markings, her heart pounding as the full scope of her situation became clear. She wasn't this monster's first victim. The other missing women Detective Santos was investigating had been here, in this same basement, chained to this same floor. But where were they now? The question haunted Sarah as she continued her methodical search for escape routes. Her captor, she'd learned his real name was David when she'd overheard him on a phone call visited twice a day, bringing food and water and sometimes staying to talk. These conversations were the most terrifying part of her captivity, not because of what he said, but because of how normal he tried to make them seem. "You're handling this better than the others," he told her during one visit, as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. Jennifer cried constantly the first few weeks. Rebecca kept trying to bargain with me, offering money, promising not to tell anyone. "But you're different." Sarah had learned not to respond to these comments, not to show the terror and revulsion they caused her. Instead, she focused on gathering information, trying to understand his patterns, his psychology, his weaknesses. David was methodical in his madness. He kept detailed records, which Sarah discovered when she spotted a notebook he'd accidentally dropped during one visit. While he retrieved it quickly, she'd caught a glimpse of pages filled with charts, dates, and what looked like medical notations. The most chilling realization came when Sarah found a small digital camera hidden in the corner of her cell, its red recording light blinking steadily in the darkness. David wasn't just holding her captive, he was documenting it, creating some kind of record of her imprisonment. The knowledge that her suffering was being recorded for his entertainment filled Sarah with a rage that burned through her fear. She began to plan more seriously, using the anger as fuel for her determination to escape. The breakthrough came during her 4th week of captivity. While testing the links of her chain for the 100th time, Sarah discovered that one of the bolts securing the chain to the floor had begun to work loose. The constant pressure she'd been applying, combined with the old concrete's gradual deterioration, had created a tiny amount of movement. It wasn't much, barely perceptible, but it was something. Sarah began working on the bolts systematically, using a small piece of metal she'd broken off from the sink's plumbing as a makeshift tool. The work had to be done in complete silence during the long hours between David's visits, and progress was agonizingly slow. But after another week of patient effort, the bolt came free. For the first time in over a month, Sarah Chen was no longer chained to the floor. Sarah's hands shook as she held the loosened bolt, hardly daring to believe that part of her restraint system had finally given way. But even with one anchor point freed, she was still far from free. The shackle remained locked around her ankle, and the chain, while no longer secured to the floor, was still heavy enough to impede any quick movement. More importantly, she was still locked in a basement room with no obvious way out. But for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. She spent the next several hours carefully exploring areas of the room that had been beyond her reach while chained. What she discovered both terrified and encouraged her. Behind a stack of old boxes in the far corner, she found evidence of David's previous victims' personal belongings that confirmed her worst fears about Jennifer and Rebecca's fate. But she also found something else: a small window well that had been concealed behind the boxes. The window above was still boarded over, but the well itself might provide another option if she could find a way to reach it. Sarah began to formulate a plan. It was desperate, dangerous, and had a low probability of success, but it was better than waiting to become David's next recorded victim. She would have one chance during his next visit, and everything would depend on timing and luck. David arrived at his usual time the following evening, carrying her dinner and a bottle of water. Sarah had positioned herself carefully, the loose chain hidden beneath her body, the freed bolt clutched in her hand. "You're being very quiet tonight," David observed, setting down the food tray. "Usually you at least pretend to be interested in conversation." Sarah remained silent, waiting for him to move closer. She'd learned his patterns over the weeks of captivity. He always checked her restraints before leaving, a security measure that had become routine. When he knelt down to examine the chain around her ankle, Sarah struck. The bolt, gripped tightly in her fist, connected with David's temple with all the force she could muster. He collapsed immediately, blood streaming from the wound. But Sarah didn't wait to see if he was unconscious or worse. She grabbed the keys from his belt and unlocked the shackle around her ankle, her hands trembling with adrenaline and terror. The door to the basement was open. David's confidence in his security measures had made him careless. Sarah ran up the stairs and found herself in what appeared to be a normal suburban home. The kitchen, living room, and front door that she prayed for weren't locked. Behind her, she could hear David stirring, groaning as he regained consciousness. The front door was unlocked. Sarah burst through it into a neighborhood she didn't recognize, screaming for help at the top of her lungs. Porch lights began to flick on as residents emerged to investigate the commotion. "Call 911. Sarah screamed at the first person she saw, a middle-aged man in a bathrobe. "I've been kidnapped. He's in that house." The man immediately pulled out his phone while his wife ushered Sarah toward their own home. Within minutes, the quiet suburban street was flooded with police cars, ambulances, and SWAT teams. Sarah was finally free. Detective Santos received the call at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in October, exactly 37 days after Sarah Chen had disappeared. The voice on the other end belonged to a patrol sergeant she didn't recognize, speaking words that seemed too good to be true. "We've got your missing person, Detective. Sarah Chen. She's alive, and we've got the suspect in custody." Santos was in her car and racing across town within 5 minutes, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and professional anticipation. After weeks of chasing shadows and following dead-end leads, the case had finally broken open. She arrived at the scene to find David Kellerman, his real name, finally being loaded into an ambulance under heavy police guard. He was conscious but disoriented, blood from Sarah's desperate blow still visible on his forehead. Sarah herself was in a second ambulance, wrapped in blankets and being treated for dehydration and minor injuries. Detective Santos? Sarah's voice was hoarse from screaming, but her eyes were alert and determined. I need to tell you about the others. Jennifer and Rebecca, I found evidence in the basement. He killed them. The search of David's house revealed the full scope of his crimes. The basement where Sarah had been held was a carefully constructed prison, equipped with restraints, surveillance equipment, and detailed records of his victims' captivity. But it was the second room, hidden behind a false wall, that contained the evidence of his ultimate intentions. Jennifer Martinez and Rebecca Winters had been buried in shallow graves in the backyard, their remains carefully preserved in plastic sheeting. David had kept detailed records of their time in captivity, including photographs and videos that would provide crucial evidence for his prosecution. "This guy is a serial killer," Santos told Emma Chen when she arrived at the hospital to reunite with her sister. Sarah's escape probably saved not just her own life, but the lives of future victims. The investigation revealed that David Kellerman was a 34-year-old former IT specialist who had been fired from multiple jobs for inappropriate behavior toward female colleagues. He'd been living off an inheritance from his deceased parents, using the money to fund his elaborate predatory scheme. His computer contained evidence of at least a dozen fake dating profiles across multiple platforms, suggesting that Sarah, Jennifer, and Rebecca might not have been his only victims. The FBI expanded the investigation nationwide, looking for other missing women who might have fallen prey to David's methodical hunting strategy. Sarah's recovery was complicated by the psychological trauma of her ordeal, but she was determined to see justice done. Her detailed testimony about David's methods, his confession to killing the other women, and his apparent plans for her own fate provided prosecutors with an airtight case. "He told me I was handling captivity better than the others," Sarah testified during the preliminary hearing, her voice steady despite the difficulty of recounting her ordeal. "He spoke about Jennifer and Rebecca like they were experiments that hadn't gone according to plan. He was planning to kill me too. I'm certain of it." David Kellerman was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of kidnapping, and multiple counts of identity theft and fraud. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he eventually accepted a plea bargain of life in prison without the possibility of parole, avoiding the death penalty that prosecutors had been prepared to seek. 6 months after her escape, Sarah Chen stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Colorado, Denver, preparing to give her first public speech about online dating safety. The auditorium was filled with college students, law enforcement officers, and members of the public who had followed her story through the media coverage of David Kellerman's trial. "I want to be clear about something from the beginning," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "What happened to me wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything wrong by using a dating app, by meeting someone for coffee, or by trusting someone who seemed genuine and kind. The blame for what happened lies entirely with the predator who targeted me." The speech was part of Sarah's ongoing recovery process, recommended by her therapist as a way to reclaim control over her narrative. But it was also part of a larger mission she'd taken on since her rescue, educating people about the sophisticated methods used by online predators and advocating for better safety measures on dating platforms. "David Kellerman spent months crafting the perfect fake persona to appeal to me specifically," Sarah continued. "He studied my social media, learned my interests, even physically surveilled my apartment building. The person I thought I was dating never existed. He was a carefully constructed lie designed to make me feel safe and understood." Emma sat in the front row, her eyes filled with tears of pride and residual fear. The past 6 months had been difficult for both sisters, but they'd grown closer through the ordeal. Emma had temporarily relocated to Denver to help Sarah through her recovery, and they'd learned to talk openly about the trauma in ways that strengthened their relationship. "The most important thing I want you to understand," Sarah said, "is that these predators are sophisticated. They're not the obviously creepy people you might imagine. They're charming, patient, and skilled at building trust. They study their victims, they plan meticulously, and they're very good at appearing normal." The audience was riveted, many taking notes on their phones and laptops. Sarah had partnered with local law enforcement and dating app companies to develop practical safety guidelines, and her presentation included specific strategies for protecting oneself while dating online. Always meet in public places for the first several dates. Tell someone exactly where you're going and when you expect to be back. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. And remember that someone who truly cares about you will respect your need for safety precautions. After the presentation, Sarah was approached by several people who shared their own experiences with online dating gone wrong. Most were minor incidents, uncomfortable encounters, people who'd lied about their appearance or age, but a few were more serious. I matched with someone on Tinder last month who seemed perfect, a young woman told Sarah during the reception afterward. But when I suggested meeting at a coffee shop, he kept pushing for me to come to his apartment instead. When I insisted on a public place, he got angry and started calling me paranoid. I blocked him, but your story makes me think I made the right choice. You absolutely made the right choice, Sarah assured her. Anyone who gets angry about reasonable safety precautions is showing you who they really are. The conversation reminded Sarah of how many potential victims might have been saved by increased awareness of predatory tactics. David Kellerman had been operating for years, possibly decades, refining his methods and targeting vulnerable women across multiple states. Detective Santos attended the presentation and approached Sarah afterward with an update on the ongoing investigation. We've identified at least 3 more possible victims, Santos told her quietly. Women who disappeared in other states after meeting men through dating apps. The FBI is reviewing those cases to see if David might have been responsible. The scope of David's crimes continued to expand as investigators dug deeper into his past. They'd found evidence that he'd been using fake identities to commit various forms of fraud for over a decade, supporting himself through identity theft, insurance scams, and other criminal activities while perfecting his predatory skills. The good news, Santos continued, is that several dating app companies have implemented new safety features as a result of your case. Photo verification, panic buttons, location sharing with trusted contacts, things that might have prevented what happened to you. Sarah nodded, feeling a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness. The changes were important, but they'd come too late for Jennifer Martinez and Rebecca Winters. Too late for the other women who might have fallen victim to David's elaborate deceptions. As the evening wound down and the auditorium emptied, Sarah stood alone on the stage for a moment, reflecting on how much her life had changed. The woman who had swiped right on Marcus Rivera's profile felt like a different person, entirely more cautious, certainly, but also stronger and more purposeful than she'd ever been. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "I'm so proud of you. Mom and Dad are watching the live stream and crying happy tears. You're helping so many people." Sarah smiled, feeling the warmth of her family's support. The trauma of her captivity would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She'd survived, she'd escaped, and she was using her experience to protect others. David Kellerman was serving life in prison, his carefully constructed predatory operation dismantled by law enforcement. The fake profiles were gone, the basement prison was sealed, and the man who had terrorized multiple women across multiple states would never hurt anyone again. But Sarah's work was just beginning. Tomorrow she had interviews with 2 podcasts and a meeting with a victims' rights organization. Next week, she was flying to Washington, D.C. to testify before a congressional committee about online safety legislation. Her sister had been right about putting herself out there, Sarah reflected with dark irony. She'd just never expected it would lead to this particular adventure. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave the auditorium, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: genuine excitement about the future. Not the naive optimism she'd felt before David Kellerman entered her life, but something deeper and more resilient. She was a survivor, and she was going to make sure her survival meant something. The following excerpt is from The Tinder Trap, A Survivor's Guide to Online Dating Safety by Sarah Chen, published by Crown Publishing Group, and currently ranked number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. People often ask me if I've ever tried online dating again. The answer is no, not because I'm afraid, but because my life took a different direction after my escape from David Kellerman's basement prison. The Sarah who swiped right on Marcus Rivera's profile was looking for connection, for adventure, for someone to share her new life in Denver with. She found all of those things, just not in the way she expected. My connection now is with the thousands of people who've reached out to share their own stories, their own close calls, their own victories over online predators. My adventure is traveling the country to speak about safety, working with law enforcement agencies, and helping to develop better protection protocols for dating apps. And the people I share my life with are the survivors, the advocates, the detectives and prosecutors who work every day to keep others safe from predators like David Kellerman. David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The FBI's investigation ultimately connected him to 7 additional victims across 4 states, women who had disappeared over a span of nearly 8 years. I think about them often, about Jennifer Martinez, who loved hiking and wanted to be a teacher, about Rebecca Winters, who moved to Albuquerque to start fresh after a difficult divorce, about the others whose names we may never know. They deserved better. They deserved to find love safely, to take chances on new relationships without fear, to swipe right on dating apps without becoming prey for a sophisticated predator. I survived David Kellerman's trap, but 7 other women didn't. I carry their memory with me in every speech I give, every interview I conduct, every safety protocol I help develop. This book is for them, and for everyone who's ever felt that flutter of excitement when a notification appears on their dating app. Romance should be about hope and possibility, not danger and deception. Stay safe out there. Trust your instincts. And remember that the right person will never make you choose between love and safety. They'll want you to have both. Sarah Chen, Denver, Colorado, October 2027. But Sarah's story doesn't end here, and neither does our investigation into the dark world of online predators. If this story shocked you, if it made you think twice about that next dating app match, then please hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happened to Sarah Chen isn't an isolated incident. It's happening right now, in cities across America, to women just like her. Every week, True Crime Vault brings you the stories that mainstream media won't tell. The cases that will make you question everything you thought you knew about safety, about trust, about the people hiding behind those perfect profile pictures. Don't just watch ACT. Share this video with every woman in your life. Your sister, your daughter, your best friend. Because the next Sarah Chen could be someone you love. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our investigations. Next week, we're diving into the Facebook Phantom, the story of a mother of 3 who thought she was chatting with her high school sweetheart, until her children found her car abandoned in a Walmart parking lot. Your support helps us dig deeper, investigate longer, and most importantly, help families like the Chens find answers. Remember, online predators are counting on your silence. Don't give them what they want. Subscribe, share, stay vigilant, and never, ever ignore your instincts. This is True Crime Vault, and we'll see you next week, in the dark.